Hey guys, Brian here from Starlite Pulp. Thanks for checking in. I believe we this is episode 16, if I'm not mistaken. And first off, just get rid of the stuff that we don't really want to talk about, and that is subscribe to the channel, please. If you dig what you see here, we could use it, and then also give it a like if you would. That would be great. Tonight we've got Peter Farris on, and his most recent U.S. release is titled "The Devil Himself." Which follows. We've got Leonard and we've got Maya in the story, and they're trying to hold the fort down, if you will. And we got Peter on tonight. So how you feeling, man?
I'm good, man. Thank you for having me into the Starlight universe. It's very cool to be here. So,
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So talk to me. First off, a couple things. This is going to sound like a two-pronged question. I guess it is, but The Devil Himself came out in 2022.
yeah,
Right. And now you have a new book out, but it's only out in France right now, correct?
correct. Yeah. So, Devil Himself is coming up kind of on its birthday. It came out May 3rd last year, and all what just came out in France about a month ago was yeah, a little more than a month ago. Sorry, is my fourth novel.
Mm.
So a book called The Bone Omen, or Le Presage, as they titled it in France. So I'm kind of uh yeah, things are screwy with me, man. They just don't make a lot of sense. My writing career doesn't make a lot of sense right now. So
Yeah, but see, the good news is the thing that works there is that you have a writing career. That's
yeah,
that's the thing to focus on, because that's what a lot of people want. So
yeah, for sure,
so
for sure.
so talk to me about the devil himself with regards to obviously the story. We've got some human trafficking going on, and we've got Leonard kind of taking Maya in, and kind of the aftermath of that. So where did that idea come from?
Yeah, I'll answer that real quick, but I should probably tell you. I mean, Devil Himself took about 10 years to get published in English.
Okay.
I had it written and kind of ready when my first novel came out, a book called Last Call for the Living. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bank robbery heist novel, and that was published by Forge Books in 2012. I thought Devil Himself was going to be the follow-up. I sent it to the editor at Forge, got no answer, and then realized like they just weren't interested at all. And then I
Right.
signed with an agent at a big agency in New York, and that person began shopping Devil Himself around in September 2013. About five publishers passed, and then that agent pretty much shelved it and checked out on me. And uh, just a little the history of this book, why it took
Sure.
so long to
Sure.
get it
Yeah.
in print. The one upside to being with that big literary agency was they had a pretty strong foreign rights department, and the foreign rights agent there got that book to a publisher in Paris, Oliver Gallmeister, along with Last Call for the Living, my debut. He loved both books, bought them, and then in short order, 2015 and then in 2017, published them. And The Devil Himself really took off in France. They did a fantastic job publishing it. It was received really well. But my agent in America was just basically completely checked out and
Huh.
not interested. So
That's bizarre.
long story short, I kept giving this person novels, but from 2013 till 2020, like I had nothing in America, and that book just kind of sat there. Even it winning awards and all the critical the praise from the press over there made no impression, and the book was never submitted anywhere during that 7-year window. So Devil Himself just kind of sat there orphaned. But anyway, that's the sad biopic of that book. But yeah, it's almost 10 years from when I finished it to actually getting it uh, uh, published in America in English, for readers
Okay.
here. So it
And
was a
that's
journey for
that's
sure.
kind of, yeah, that's kind of crazy, because like, I mean, I don't want to say you're unique, because I'm sure there are a few others in your category, but having being an American author, writing books in English and then having them published first in France is a little unusual.
Yeah, there are more refugees now like me. Uh, Gallmeister has become a bit of a outpost for some writers like me. a fantastic writer, a friend of mine, Benjamin Whitmer. He's kind of now like only publishing in Europe, and there's a couple others, and a lot of them have found a home with Gallmeister, which is fortunate, or other writers who with other publishers in France that have had more success there, been able to cultivate an audience and a readership, and just for mostly silly reasons or mostly or sales. It comes down to, for a lot of writers, just are forgotten in America. Can't publish at the level that maybe their work deserves, or they have to resort to micro presses or self-publishing or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, mind you. But yeah, I got very lucky that this foreign rights agent did her job and got my work in front of a publisher there who she thought I was a good match for. And he believed in me and believes in sort of the old school way of publishing, where unlike in America, you pretty much have one shot and you're done.
Right.
You got to hit a home run your first time at bat, or you're dead. You'll never get another book published, most likely. And if you do, maybe you get a second book, but that one better succeed or you're really, really, in trouble. But my publisher in France believes in sort of climbing that ladder, incrementally earning a readership the old-fashioned way.
Sure.
And still stands by. I mean, he's got to keep the lights on. He's got to pay the bills. He is looking for stuff that he thinks has a commercial appeal, but by and large, he wants to publish books that he loves. And then he figures out how to sell them. They've had failures, sure, but that's inspiring to me. When he told me that at dinner in Paris one time, it blew my mind, because editors in New York, they don't care at all about anything but the bottom line. I mean, they
Right.
just, if they don't think they can make money off of you, you're in trouble. So I've been very fortunate in France to sort of, it started with the devil himself. I got lucky. It kind of struck a chord and resonated with readers over there and booksellers, and been able to just steadily keep sort of climbing, challenging myself, trying to write the best book I can, and knowing that they'll do a good job publishing me. And we've done 4 books together and counting, and they feel like family. And I'm really, really lucky, because I have nothing like that in America, and I probably never will.
That's awesome.
At this point. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. It kind of reminds me of that Tom Waits song, "Big in Japan."
Yeah, I feel like I'm like the Jerry Lewis of Southern noir, and or something. So it's a weird place to be, because normally, like, Dennis Lehane has a new book out, and typically big A-listers, the book will be published simultaneously in different territories. And where I couldn't afford to wait any longer with, like, my new book, The Bone Omen. I lost a year and a half because of COVID. I had a book tour canceled, and COVID, everything got delayed because of it, of course. So it's tough. You caught me at a time where I've been really demoralized, but it's tough because I all I've ever wanted in America was just to publish regularly, so that I could hopefully have a chance at earning a readership. Just
Sure.
get a book out every 2 years and hope for that it's published well. And I just haven't had that experience at all. But I've been able to have that in France, and it's very, very precious. But we can get to that. I can realize that you asked me about the inspiration for the book, and I got sidetracked.
No, that's okay. That's what this is about, man.
I got France on the brain. I was just there.
We're just having a conversation. Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, noir and France go back a long ways. I mean, there's a long relationship with noir, and going back to film noir in the 30s.
And a lot of American writers finding an audience and getting traction there, just being appreciated and recognized when they were completely ignored at home. I don't know, Chester Himes, Philip K. Dick. There's quite a few writers like that. And I'm not going to put myself in that category, but there are quite a few writers who have found a home there. And thanks to, maybe a good publisher that believes in them, have been able to just earn that readership and publish regularly. And if I do my job and keep giving Gallmeister the best book I can, I'll have opportunities to go over there and tour, make some money, which is nice, but I don't really care about all that. It's just more that we don't write books and fucking short stories to sit on a hard drive,
exactly.
If you do something creative, you're searching for some validation, some affirmation, and part of that in the writing world is to see it published well, at what you hope is a high level, and all of that entails, and that helps. It helps your self-esteem. It helps your confidence. And those things are important. It's part of the idea of creating something and sharing it with folks. And so I've been able to have that in France, and it's helped me tremendously because I haven't had anything like that in America. And I've been totally honest with you. It's absolutely demoralizing. A lot of ups and downs with it because on one hand, I got people in my ear in France saying, like, we love your work, we respect this. Like, why aren't you published in America? It's crazy to us. And I've got readers in America asking me on social media every week. Somebody's like, hey, where can I get your new book in English? Or why can't I get it in English?
Right.
Why
Right.
aren't you published in English? Like, why are these people good enough to publish in English and you're not? You're just as good as those people. Like, I don't want to sound bitter, but it's like that stuff just starts rattling around in your head,
Of
and it
course.
can really make you just drag you down,
Of
It's
course.
so it's tough, but I'm just really grateful for what I do have, which is like you're
Sure.
saying, a career and a readership and a publisher who supports me and believes in me, which is very
Absolutely.
rare in America. You don't see that a lot, with writers and publishers. Everyone's
Yeah.
just bouncing around now,
Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and you know what else? Who else was kind of has had a similar experience to yours? Funny enough, was a lot of jazz musicians back in the like 30s, 40s, and 50s
Yeah.
would they would they would play America, of course, but then they'd go to France and they'd go to the Netherlands and places like that, and that would they'd they'd play absolute packed houses there.
They were
And
revered. Yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, they
I,
were revered, and then they'd come back home and it's like, oh, jazz.
people could care less. Yeah,
Yeah,
it can be very kind of schizophrenic unless maybe you're a huge A-lister. I'm not talking about,
yeah, yeah.
a big shot, but like in my case, I this is probably my best tour to date. I was set to go to Paris in March 2020 for a 2-week tour. I was every time I go over there, my publisher sends their writers in general to kind of a new area. So you see different parts of the country, you visit places that aren't used to having American writers, and
Mhm.
it's been a great sort of philosophy. So I was supposed to go over in 2020, go to the Super Bowl of crime noir. It's called Cue du Pilar in the city of Lyon. It's a huge cultural event
Cool.
where I was this time. But anyway, that tour, a few days before my flight to Paris, that the festival got canceled, and then everything fell like dominoes, and we all
Mhm.
know what happened
Mhm.
next.
Yeah, yeah,
The enormity of the pandemic started to set in.
yeah.
So I was heartbroken. There were bigger things to worry about, but I wanted to quit writing this book, The Bone Omen. I didn't think I'd ever publish again. I never thought I'd get over there and see friends again and experience, a book tour in France. But I didn't quit. Publisher believed in me. We made it happen, and this was probably my best tour to date. I went to the Southwest Coast in addition to Cue de Pilar. Had great turnouts at the bookstores when
It,
I'd lost a year and a half due to COVID. The festival in Lyon, I was there with an amazing writer named William Boyle.
mhm.
Um, and we had, I don't know, I think there were estimates, maybe 90,000 people over the course of 3 days visiting
Wow.
that. Families, it's like it's a giant cultural event, and you really see why the French, it's in their DNA. They champion writers, they champion the written word. And it's just a really huge part of their culture. And it's unlike anywhere else in Europe and America, forget it. There's no comparison.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. It really, I came home really with my spirits, buoyed, and I was like ready to get back to work on a new book. But still, it starts to eat at you, where I'm kind of like every week, hey, like, why don't you have a new book out? You should right now. I
Right.
should have a new book out in America. It's
Right.
been a
Right.
year. I should be promoting a new book right now,
Right.
and I'm not.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't have a publisher right now, so it's
Yeah.
like um, it's a bit schizophrenic, but I owe a lot to the devil himself. That book is the reason I have, a readership in France. So it struck a chord over there, and readers here in America have seemed to really respond to it. Just it's been mostly a bit invisible.
Right.
So
Right.
if I can be honest.
Right. And
But
and so and so are there any plans, I guess? Are there any ideas, plans, anything like that to get the Bone Omen? Is that the title, right?
yeah, I have a third novel. Yeah,
It,
yeah.
are there any
That's my
plans to
fourth
get
novel. I
that
have a
in
third
English?
novel which is published in France.
But are there any plans to get
Yeah,
that
my
in
agent's
theaters?
shopping it around right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, oh, did you get me? Sorry, it backed up for a second there. I heard you a couple times. Yeah, my agent is shopping it around right now. I've had a couple publishers pass, so it's still in the mix.
Okay.
There's a chance, but it's just I've been through this before, and it's tough. I have an orphan third novel, The Clay Eaters, which has hit the bestseller list over there, received great reviews, was shortlisted for a bunch of awards, and that
Mhm.
one has no publisher either in America. So
Okay.
um, it's a weird spot to be in. It sucks, frankly.
Sure.
But there it's I have to keep things in perspective because there are a lot of writers out there, a lot of great writers I know personally, who can write circles around the New York Times bestseller list, who can't even get an agent right now
Yeah.
or have several orphan novels. So you have to have perspective about this because it's a dismal, dismal business in America. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. It really is. And I mean, like you said, you have to keep in perspective the fact that you not only are publishing in France, but you're publishing to acclaim and awards in France, which is awesome. I mean, yes, I totally get that it's frustrating as hell here. I do, but there's a whole lot of writers out there that would give two fingers off their left hand to be in your position too. So I
yeah,
mean,
for sure.
just
Yeah.
so it's I mean, we talk about on a lot of the podcasts here. I talk to writers about kind of the business and how they got into it, how they got published, because I swear sometimes writers out there who aren't publishing uh think that there is like some secret guideline that they're not getting somehow, and there really isn't. That's the thing. It's like there's so many different ways to get published, and sometimes it's just luck. um
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, you just got to get your stuff out there. You just got to keep
Yeah, I agree.
keep
I
sending
have
it. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I was going to say I have some writers. The weird thing with my first novel was that I could probably count them on one hand, but it had this like small cult following, and
Uh-huh.
a few writers have approached me over the years that have become friends and some have gotten really successful, who said that book inspired them to become a writer,
Nice.
or it was a huge influence on them, which is crazy to hear and cool, super cool. And so I've met some younger writers, not much younger than me, but they're in those early stages of trying to get an agent, and they're getting, novellas out and short stories. And I've tried, and they've asked me for advice, and I've been through the ringer with the agent stuff and with publishers, where it does more often than not come down to luck. You can shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
I was naive and I made mistakes, especially when I was younger, for sure. I wish I could do some things differently,
Sure.
but any creative pursuit, like, you have to have luck. I mean, things can break your way or they don't. And there's only so much luck to go around, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
It's true.
So it can be frustrating when you just never seem to have any, and you watch other writers seem to have all the luck in the world, and it's just that's life. It's tough. I mean, here's a case in point: like The Devil himself last year was being set up for film at Miramax, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had a director. It was based on my script. They were happy with it. They were about to start sending out offers to actors. They'd done budget assumptions. There was a preliminary shooting schedule. The plan was to
Wow.
shoot it in
Uh-huh.
Wilmington right now. So all the right noises were being made, and it felt
Right.
like it was going to happen. And then, without warning, last fall, Miramax dropped the project,
Mm-hmm.
along with apparently several others in development. So the director and I were completely devastated. I knew what that would have meant for my publishing prospects, and
Sure. Sure.
of multi-million-dollar movie with a well-known star in it, playing Leonard, the old man. You
Uh-huh.
know, so there's a world where that happens, right? And
Right.
things are different for me. And that book, things are different for the devil himself. And maybe I'm like, that new book is coming out right now because a movie's happening. And so and then it's just luck. there's nothing I could do to will that movie into happening. It just
Right.
either was or it wasn't, you know?
Right.
And so
Right.
you can get really wrapped around the axle thinking about the what ifs and stuff. And you just have to accept and get philosophical about it, that any creative pursuit, luck is going to play a huge role. If you're trying to do everything else right, cultivate your
Mhm.
talent, work hard, not be an asshole, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah.
So,
No, and you know what, Peter? I mean, I grew up in LA, and I never worked in the industry myself, but I've had multiple family members, multiple actually generations of family members who've worked in the industry, and it is tempestuous at best. I mean, it's
yeah,
one of those things where, like for example, your project would have employed how many people,
yeah, it was,
right?
it's
Between
probably,
between gaffers and grips and truck drivers and everything else, and all of a sudden somebody in some office just says nope, and that's it. You know,
yeah, I mean the sort of trickle down when you think of this big project, and again, I think quoting Spike Lee, like it's a miracle anything gets made out there, and it's a miracle anything's good, film wise. So, but from a personal standpoint, I thought this is going to be a big break,
sure,
and improve
sure,
my publishing prospects, and it was a crushing blow for sure, but uh, you have to accept these things, and not get too down about like the fact that it's happening for other people, and you just have to get back to work and try something else and hope that there's life there. I still think Devil himself would make a great movie, and it's actually a producer wants to option it right now, an independent producer, but so it's cool. It's cool. It might still have life after all.
sure, yeah,
And I just don't know who they'll cast as the mannequin. That's obviously the most important role.
right, right, right. Okay, yeah. I mean, the so wait, before we leave France,
Yeah,
there's one thing I want to go over, because you had a book tour for 2 weeks, which is awesome and amazing. You touched on that.
yeah,
But you also went to the Paris catacombs,
yeah,
and as somebody who has not been to Paris, like I said, I've been to Europe a couple times, never been to Paris, and
yeah.
so uh, the Paris catacombs seem awesome. So what did you find there? How was it? What
Oh man,
what do you have to
yes.
say about it?
Yeah, my wife had visited Paris and the catacombs 20 years prior,
Okay.
and she knew that I would love it. So after my tour and our downtime in Paris, when she flew out to join me, we were relaxing for a couple days. She took me, and it was the grimmest, bleakest, most metal place on the planet. I want to do a book reading down there or signing or something.
That
I
would be
think
awesome.
I
Yeah.
don't know. They're very whoever owns it or operates it, this ossuary that just kind of rambles around. If I'm saying ossuary right, if I'm pronouncing it right, I'm not sure. But you're under the streets of Paris, and there's literally bones for miles in every
Hmm.
direction. They're
Hmm.
stacked up 5, 6 meters deep, and that it's been preserved. Not only, and in addition to the history, certainly calamities contributing to all these bodies they had to find a place for. Plague being a major
Of course,
supplier.
of course. Yeah.
Not to be too cynical about it, but it is just grim and dark, and I really enjoyed it. But you sort of kind of try not to be too childish down there too, thinking about like
Sure,
all of
sure.
this death piled up in every direction,
Yeah.
um, and you just sort of wander through this labyrinthine sort of underground tunnels surrounded by bones. And yeah, it's you talk about just this absolutely bleak atmosphere. It was spooky. It was really spooky. I loved it though. It was a highlight of my time in Paris. I've never had a chance to do tourist stuff over there, believe
Uh-huh.
it or not, other than places I'm visiting. Sometimes I've had a day off in Paris. One time I was with my translator. I got my publisher's logo tattooed on my arm
Nice.
in Paris, and we spent the day wandering around when I had a free day. But got to pop in like Notre Dame, for example, but I've never gone to museums. I've never, strolled along the river for any length of time, say in
Sure.
Paris. Uh, so this was cool that I got to do that and a bunch of other stuff, relaxing for 3 days. And it was, yeah, it was the catacombs are awesome, man. Like I said, I would love to do some sort of guerrilla book event down there
Sure.
if
That'd
I
be
could
awesome.
swing
Yeah.
it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually in Prague I went to a church where
Hmm.
everything was made of bone.
Bones.
You know,
Yeah.
even the light fixtures and the the decks and everything just bone, which was crazy. But obviously the catacombs are like 100 times that. So
Yeah, like I said, it was just like the most metal place ever. It was astounding. I've never seen anything quite like it. So yeah, it was a highlight next to eating, uh, everything I could get my hands on over there,
sure.
especially French cuisine. I'm pretty adventurous when it comes to food. I cook a lot of wild game. I'm big in love
Mhm.
hunting. So over there, like I'm not gonna turn, escargot, frog legs. Octopus. I was eating like everything, whatever's regional, whatever's great locally. I want to try it all over there. So
Sure.
yeah, it was an amazing trip, amazing country. Yeah, it blows my mind that something I wrote has afforded me this privilege. That
Yeah,
I made up
that's
a
awesome.
story, and it's allowed me to like go to this country I never in a million years thought I would visit. Um, and it's surreal, totally surreal. But like to go back to my point, they real bookseller, to be a bookseller in France is a noble profession. It's not a retail job. People go to school to learn how to be a bookseller or own a bookstore, or they go to school to learn how to work in publishing. Um, and readers over there, it's just another level of passion for books, crime noir in particular, but really just books in general. It's part of their culture in a way that I've never seen. It's not. I don't think you see it even in other countries in Europe quite like they do it in France. So. Yeah, something my publisher told me once at dinner in Paris always stuck with me too. He said, Pete, we do three things well, really well, better than anybody in France. We do cheese, we do wine, and we do books. And
There you
I was
go.
like,
There you
I
go.
was like, Amen, brother,
That's
Amen.
awesome. Yeah. That's excellent. That's awesome. All right, so talk to me about this. As a writer, you've got what, 4 books under your belt, right?
Yeah, I've got four, and then I've got four published, just
Mhm.
include with France, two published in America out of those four.
Right.
And Last Call for the Living was also published in Germany, my first novel, and Devil
Very cool.
Himself is going to be published in Italy, I think later this year. And that'll be my first translation in Italy. And then I'm working on a new novel, and I have a novel completed. So I've got
Okay.
like five and a half total right now,
Right. Okay.
so to speak.
So then two things. Two-pronged question here. Number one, how did you become a writer?
Mm.
Like what made you want to become a writer? What moreover, you know, the James Baldwin quote is, and I'm paraphrasing the hell out of this, but it's you kind of find out that you are a writer. Nobody taps you on the shoulder and tells you. It's
Yeah.
like it kind of dawns on you that you are. So first off, how did you become a writer? And secondly, who were some major who were some major kind of influences for you?
Yeah, first influence kind of ties into the first part of your question was my father was a writer. He's
Right.
retired, but my dad was a full-time novelist and screenwriter. My mother worked too, was and had a great career, but I grew up to the sound of like his Smith Corona typewriter, just
Right.
filling the household. Um, and so I sort of he never pushed any of that on me, like reading, for example. But I grew up surrounded by books. In his office, in the living room, there are bookshelves everywhere. Like our spots. There's just
Hmm.
always books around.
Yep.
If I turn the camera, like there's a huge bookshelf off this way.
There you go.
So like I saw my dad always reading a newspaper, always reading poetry, always reading a novel, always reading nonfiction. And then I grew up watching him in a chair for 4 to 5 hours a day at a typewriter, just kind of
Yep.
in the zone. So I got a firsthand look at kind of what the creative side of writing entailed, the level of concentration. And then I started to read, and I was always a big reader growing up. You get into your teens and I started reading my dad's stuff. He was mostly known in the horror world, and is part of kind of the 80s horror boom, with sort of
Yep.
an influence on Stephen King, acknowledged by King. Peter
Saw
Straub
that.
was
Yep.
a contemporary, and before him, Richard Matheson, but he was kind of part of that continuum. So I grew up, I started reading my dad's books, started reading Stephen King, reading Peter
Mhm.
Straub. Then, I read, I discovered I Am Legend by Richard Matheson,
Mhm.
was reading, and then discovered Robert Bloch. And I don't know, it's just like started reading a lot of horror and genre stuff in my teens. Um, and it wasn't until after college I was really big into music and always have been. It's a huge part
Right.
of my life. Always playing in bands, and I started always as a vocalist. I played drums, but
Hmm.
never played
Okay.
drums in a band. So right out of college, I was playing in a band and was writing lyrics, doing
Mhm.
vocals,
Sure.
and it seemed like the natural start for me was writing lyrics that were abstract and kind of poetic, I guess. It's as pretentious as that sounds, but
Yeah.
that was like the start. That was the gateway
Mhm.
drug for me.
Sure.
Writing lyrics progressed into like reading more poetry and trying to write it. Then I started reading better writers. I was getting turned into onto a lot of stuff. Chekhov, Raymond Carver,
Yeah.
and then I started reading a lot of crime fiction too around then too. So we're talking like my early 20s. My dad, another writer, a friend of mine, David Scow, turned me on to everyone like Donald Westlake.
Yeah.
So I was
Sure.
discovering crime and pulp stuff. But then what really opened the doors for me, blew them wide open, was a friend of mine recommended a Larry Brown memoir, On Fire, and then his first short story collection, Facing the Music. So I read those two early Larry Brown. On Fire was a little bit later after he'd sort of become, Larry Brown, but Facing the Music blew my mind.
Uh-huh.
And then from there, I discovered Cormac McCarthy, Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, regional writers.
Yeah.
I really, Harry Crews, Barry Hanna, the list goes on and on. But sometime in my early 20s, that it was like a continuum for me of song lyrics, poetry, short fiction, which was terrible, but I was trying it. And
Yeah, exactly.
I attempted like a novel length manuscript, which no one would ever will never see because it's terrible. But
Oh yeah,
I
mine too.
realized,
First
yeah,
one,
yeah,
terrible.
and
Terrible.
that's every writer has a couple
Mhm.
of those, and I do
Yeah.
too. And I realized what I was going through was what Larry Brown would talk about, that apprenticeship period. I didn't
Mhm.
realize it at the time, but I started to read regional writers, and I started to read with a purpose in my early and mid 20s, and it really changed everything for me. And I realized like I want to try and do this for no reason. Not I grew up with it. My dad could make money as a writer
Right.
and had a great run, especially in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s with like screenwriting work too. And books still sold,
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
sold at levels where writers could make a pretty decent living. So I didn't care about that. I just was like reading Larry Brown and Ron Rash, who's on my Mount Rushmore. Um, and thinking like I want to write stories like this that are visceral and make you feel something. Um, to use a word that I think it's not applied correctly with fiction or applied the way I think it should. I wanted to write fiction that triggered you.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think like crime fiction and fiction in general should trigger you. I think it should make you feel something, and
Sure.
sometimes those feelings will be unwanted.
Yeah. Oh
Now,
yeah.
it
Yeah.
can be it can be distasteful, it can be pornographic or exploitative. Yeah, that's a conversation to have. But if it's done right and if it's done elegantly, it
Mhm.
should really stir something in you, whatever
Right.
that is.
Right.
So when I was started reading these regional writers, I was like, the first light bulb that went off was, I can write about home. I can write about Georgia. I can write
Yeah.
about what's around me,
Yeah.
my experiences. I can put, personal things and observations into a book. I never was I realized early on, I'm not going to be a writer that can invent a world and write science fiction or high fantasy.
Yeah.
Hats off to people who do that. One big important part of a young writer's of that apprenticeship period is figuring out how you're wired and what you want to write. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so those regional writers were my big influence. Those Mount Rushmore writers, Ron Rash, Flannery O'Connor, Larry Brown, Court McCarthy, um, is where I was like, I want to try to do this, and that's when I wanted to write crime fiction set in the South, based on my love for wild places,
Mhm.
for rural areas, and I didn't want to write horror though. I wanted to just focus on having some sort of crime element, even if it's not really the focus of my books. It's just there. That's the sandbox that I decided to play in.
Sure. Yeah. See, that's interesting because for me, I grew up reading just like you, a bunch of horror when I was a kid. Loved it. Early Stephen King. I mean, it seemed like I was constantly reading a Stephen King novel or book of short stories. But it really, when you said I want to try to do this, I didn't know if I could do that. I didn't know. But when I read Chandler, and keep in mind, I grew up in LA. So when I read Chandler and it's all LA and it's PI, it all of a sudden went, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I might want to try this, and so, and one of the things you said there that I think is really interesting is, I was writing this down as you were writing it, the apprenticeship period, that Larry Brown mentions, when we first start writing, whoever we are, doesn't matter, Peter, Brian, the two of us, but it really doesn't matter. Pick any writer you want. When we first start writing, it's terrible. we want to think somehow that we're going to be like Eddie Van Halen and pick up a guitar and not know how to read music and just, be able to shred. That isn't how it works. You need to sit down and write bad paragraphs and write bad sentences and think they're great, and then go back and go, oh, wow. That's a part of the process, just like anything else. And like you said, the first novel I ever wrote, it's bad. I mean, it's bad. I mean, there are pieces of it that I still like here and there, but boy, here I was trying to shop that around, and I'm going, I'm glad this never saw the light of day.
Yeah, I some writers maybe are gifted with they have a gift for language maybe, or they have an incredible vocabulary or incredible sense for description, whatever. So you do see some writers that like find their voice early or write something that is, astoundingly good at an early age. But I found that most of the writers that I admired, it wasn't until really their mid 30s, you get 35, 36, until they published their first book. And so you've had some experience and you've had that opportunity to absorb fiction and then learn how to write it. Plus, too, every writer is different. Some writers make it, they focus on education and writers groups or creative writing, and they pursue it in school, and those have value for sure. Other writers just figure it out for themselves. I had sort of some guidance from my dad, at least as far as I remember, like the first long form thing I wrote, which is atrocious, and I showed it to him, and he did it on purpose, but it looked like when he got done with it, or it looked like when he got done with it, a red pen had thrown up all over the fucking thing. Like, it was carnage. And what he was doing at first was line editing my terrible first attempt at a novella, and showing me how imprecise and clunky and ragged my sentences were, and no sentence escaped his pen. Now, he wasn't trying to be a jerk about it, but he was laying an example of, like, if you want to, you have to read with a purpose, process how your favorite writers do it, then figure out how to write readable fiction yourself with finding your voice and not mimicking somebody. Some writers are brilliant mimics too, and that's cool.
Oh, yeah.
Some are bricklayers. I've always been fond of saying this, some writers are bricklayers, some are architects, and you figure out kind of where you fit in that spectrum. But my dad was showing me when I was like 24, 25 and wrote this, hey dad, what do you think of this? It's brilliant, right? No. And he showed me sentence by sentence how ragged and sorry it all was, and incoherent. So every writer has to have that happen at some point. So
absolutely.
You either do it writing groups, peers, however you do it, but you've got to have that exposure. Somebody's got to tell you, man, you are straight hot garbage, and you've got no future.
It is interesting too, because like you said, it doesn't matter where it comes from. It can come from anywhere. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It might come from your dad. It might come from your girlfriend. It might come from a writing group. It might come from your school group, whatever it is. For me personally, it was in the master's program at USC, where every single thing we brought in, short story, plays, and poetry, everything had to be workshopped. So,
Yeah.
you'd have a group of 10, 12 people in the room, and everyone gets a copy, and, everybody reads it, and then they give feedback. And, that's that, I don't know, just that time period where you're sitting there just going, oh God,
Yeah, it can be brutal. It can be really discouraging depending. But I think every writer needs to find a way to get a second set of eyes on their
Yeah,
work,
has
or
to.
multiple sets of eyes, because it's that's the only way you're really going to improve. If we're talking craft, and for me, I've had that here and there. And just you just try and value it when you can, and then once you sort of figure out the nuts and bolts of writing fiction, then you're kind of off to the races, and that's the
Yeah.
beautiful part of it. But learning technique, I think, is the hardest part for a lot of writers. you
Yeah.
know and once you figure out technique and learn how to write readable fiction,
Mhm.
then you get into the stuff that's more fun to me, which is like, description and character and dialogue, and themes and metaphors and subtext and all the little like granular things that are fun to try and mess with when you're writing a novel, for example.
Sure.
For me, it was technique, like just learn how to write, uh, uh, fiction that is not repugnant.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Well,
efficient.
and the tricky part, Peter, is that even once you get to the level where you're getting published, I think when Nolan was on, I think one of the things he said that I thought was kind of funny, but also kind of hits it on the head,
Yeah,
is he said it's easy to fall in love with your own bullshit.
yeah,
And it's even when you get to that stage where you are publishing, then all of a sudden you've got a novel out and you're publishing short stories and everything's going well, and then all of a sudden somebody looks at one of your pieces and goes, "Hmm." And that's good. That's a good thing, because it is easy to just kind of think, oh, well, like you said, now I'm off to the races. Now I can just, the hard part is done. You know,
yeah.
the trials and
No,
tribulations are done,
I
and they're not
there's
really.
got to be some checks and balances
Yep.
there, which is why having a good editor, like in France, working with the same editor and publisher for 4 books and counting, I trust his feedback and
Sure.
value his opinion, and I mean, here's a perfect example, like the Bonome in my new book, which it's getting, at least as far as like the notices and the press, but the reaction from booksellers and readers over there, it's the best yet for me in my career.
Awesome.
It's just really, really positive. So I was worried because it's a very strange book. And when I first started writing it, the part of the story, uh, it opens in France.
Uh-huh.
This version that did not happen, but I wrote about 10,000 words, and I present this character who's in the book as it was published now, but I present the main character, and he's in France, and he's an American expatriate, and he's fled and assimilated to life in France, African American, and from South Georgia, and he's assimilated to French culture and found a new life there, and he's confronted when we meet him in these opening chapters by a journalist who knows his real story. That
Uh-huh.
was how I opened this book, and she says, "I know who you are, and I know what happened." And so I showed that to him before I got any further, like 10,000 words roughly.
Right. Right.
And I wanted to know, like, is this stuff in France persuasive? Is it working for you? Because I was concerned. I didn't want to write a book that half of it was set in France, thinking this is just brilliant. I've been
Right.
here now, and like I know France better than French people do. So, long story short, my publisher there read it, those opening chapters, and he just said no. He's like, this isn't doing it for me. This reads like an American writer trying to write a, about French culture, about something set in France, and it just
Sure.
feels it's not persuasive. It feels fake. And I realized, and the smartest thing I could do was ignore that advice. I mean, the dumbest thing I could have done was ignore that advice and say, "No, you're wrong. My shit's awesome."
Right.
I
Right.
reevaluated everything, and I said, he's right, and this isn't honest. My favorite word is persuasive. The writing is not persuasive, and a French
Very
reader
good.
is not going to respond to this. So I scrapped it, and I said everything in Georgia, in rural Georgia, where I'm comfortable writing and that I
Right.
know well. And So perfect example of having, in my case, just an editor, or if you're workshopping stuff, or
Mhm.
you're in school, or you're just maybe part of a little group and you're working with other writers and getting feedback. Like, you got to trust, you got to sometimes trust those voices, because if they have your best interest at heart. Certainly my publisher in France did, and I owe that advice to him, that I didn't write what could have been a really bad book.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's important part of being a writer, is just being willing to listen and being willing to accept the type of constructive criticism that can only help you get better.
Absolutely. One of the fascinating things to me is, now that we're putting out these reviews, which I love doing, but we read these stories, and so many of the writers are very talented, very good writers, and yet, a large percentage of them get a no, regardless.
Yeah.
Because we can only fit, anywhere between 10 and 14 stories in any issue, and we might get, upwards of 70, 100, whatever submissions. So a lot of them are just going to be no's, period. And that part is really interesting, because it's hard to do that. Like, as a publisher, that was something that I didn't know going into this. Like I told you before, I had worked on lit mags before, but I was never the one at the end of the day going, nope. I was the one saying, maybe not, or yeah, let's move this one on. Now all of a sudden I'm the one sending out the thanks so much for your interest in Starlite Pulp, but and it's a really different process, and it's like, it is so important to listen to people and get that feedback, but at the end of the day, it's just one voice too. Like
Yeah, you have
I
to
could be
really,
wrong. I mean,
it's a bit of a dance psychologically if you're a
mhm,
writer or you're doing something creative,
it
because
is.
you have to also block out a lot of noise. I'm telling people, I got some writers who ask me for advice, or they're in the same situation maybe, and they're like, how can I break into Europe or something? Um, or France in particular. It comes up, but I try and just tell, especially younger writers who've asked me about stuff, where I'm just like, listen, the only thing that matters is what's on the page. Forget all this other nonsense. There, there's a trend in publishing too, where it seems like the only thing what's more important is who you are, your biography, your identity, instead of what you write. And I just come from a different school of thought.
Mhm,
I loved it when writers were invisible, and you
mhm.
just respond to what's on the page, and you don't think about who the writer is, or their background, or whether they were a Navy SEAL and they operated chimpanzee rescue in their free time, or something, like, whatever. Like, author bios just get so ridiculous, where
Right,
I don't care about the author at all.
right.
The author should be invisible to me, and if I'm thinking about the writer while I'm reading their work, then something is wrong with the work. Should be
Absolutely. Agreed.
they should be invisible. And so I try and approach my own fiction the same way too, with the hope that, kind of following the philosophy of my French publisher, I just want, the reaction to be, I love this and I don't care about
Right,
anything else. Like,
right,
so people should read this, and that's how he operates.
right.
Um, and I've tried to channel that into, just when I sit down to write, like, what kind of story I'm writing, and the tenor and tone of the prose and the atmosphere and everything that goes into writing fiction. Like, I just want it to hit people hard, and I don't want them to be thinking about me. They shouldn't be at all.
Right.
And but to your point too, like, trying to be a publisher as well, you realize, especially in America, how hard it is. There's like so many writers out there. There's
Mhm.
so few outlets. There's so many few opportunities to publish, especially at a high level. I'm getting turned down basically because of sales. It's not the quality of the work that
Yeah.
editors are
Oh,
passing
yeah.
on, like the
Yeah,
bonus
without
you
question.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like that's tough. And you really have to develop thick skin to all that, because despair is a big part of being a writer, you know?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, so much of it is, I see these people, and this isn't a knock on them. I promise. It's really not. These people are making a living, doing what they want to do, and that's fantastic for them. But a
Yeah.
lot of these, like, romance and young adult novels and things like that, they're not great writers. They just fit a niche,
Hmm.
and their publisher knows that in that niche they're going to sell. So therefore, they pump out a book every other year. Whereas, we both know that there are a ton of really talented writers out there who don't fit into a niche. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden they can't get published anywhere. And it has, like you said, it little to nothing to do with the quality of the work. It's just, like we like we went back to before, there is an element of luck in the whole thing.
Yeah, kind of a mentor to me, a friend of the family, David Scow, is a screenwriter, famous short story writer and novelist too. Said something to me once. He said that, most writers don't get the careers they think they deserve, and there's nothing wrong with thinking you deserve more for your work. But you have to realize, assuming you don't do things you don't get in your own way, or you're a lunatic or something, luck is just such a huge part of it. And every writer it's in any creative pursuit, especially like in show business. Look at, actors and actresses who talk about that big break they either got or they didn't. Musicians, it happens all the time too.
Oh, sure.
Us, you can try and, you can listen to the cliches about like, luck is where hard work meets preparation. That's cool. Listen, I've worked my ass off, and I've also tried to, do things right. I know writer friends too who've done the same, who are very talented. They just can't, for the life of them, catch a break. Where other writers seem to catch all the breaks, and everything just seems to work out. And so it's such a crapshoot. The problem too is the system in America, publication process, everything about it sets writers up for failure. So folks out there, especially if you're like a aspiring writer just getting started, everything just sets you up for failure the way it has to work, where you have to find an agent. If you want to write commercial fiction, let's say crime fiction, this might not apply to other genres and, parts of the publishing world, but, you have to find an agent. And depending on that agent's stature and cachet and their level of engagement with your work and a million things, then they're the ones who are going to be sending it to potential publishers.
Right.
And I tell writers too all the time, there is a perfect publisher for you. There is a perfect agent for your book. If you've written a semi-coherent novel that an agent thinks they can make a buck off of, right? There's a publisher out there who will put it out. So let's say you write a great book, like there's a perfect agent for you out there, but you query that agent and they blow you off, or they don't even reply, or they're too busy, or they're closed for queries. So you start going down the list. So you just start making compromises, like until you finally get an agent who's like, I'll take you on, sure, but they're maybe not the best fit for you. Maybe they don't have a good pitch history with the right publisher. So now my next point, there's a perfect publisher for that book, but you've already compromised on the agent. Now it's like, okay, they're going to shop it around. This would be a perfect book at so-and-so, the perfect book for so-and-so, but this agent doesn't have a history with this perfect editor there, or doesn't have a good pitch history or submission history, or maybe like, I don't know, insulted them in a bar one night. I mean, who knows?
Exactly.
Then they start going down the list and compromising. All right, this publisher, no. How about this publisher? And that publisher agrees, but they're not a good fit for your work, but they buy it anyway. And like, you're just doomed. You're destined for failure with this cascading, like, waterfall of compromise that happens. And that's the engine that drives the failure rate in American publishing. So so many writers put out a book and it disappears in a week, despite trying to do everything right, spending $10,000 on a publicist to manufacture recognition for it. Like, it's just like luck plays such a huge factor in all of this. And, they see the one writer hit the lottery and you realize like that's a 1 in a million thing you're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, that's I'll get off my crazy soapbox there, but I just like, you think about all this stuff, and I've been around, I've seen how the sausage is made, and I've watched enough of this happen, and I've seen the trends, and every year there's like 1 or 2 writers who get hyped and ordained, like, this is the one. To unfortunately, the a lot of writers every week, when that fire hose of books that go out to bookstores get swept aside, and kind of disappear. So it's a frustrating thing. And I think writers out there who are younger or just starting out need to think about all this stuff, because it can really discourage you when you should just be focusing on writing good stories. You start worrying about all this nonsense,
And that's it. So, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, not to sound overly naive or simplistic, but at the end of the day, it really is all about the work. I mean, you know as well as I do, you write because you love to write.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you weren't publishing and they weren't paying you for it, you'd still be writing.
Yeah, I mean, there are times I
So
wanted to quit.
I mean,
Like I wanted to quit on the Bonome multiple times. That was during COVID and the worst depression and despair I've ever experienced, and I channeled all that into the book, which is why it's my most personal novel. My publisher recognized that though, encouraged me not to quit. And I'll never forget something that he told me in France, where he said, listen, if you don't want to do social media or promote your stuff online, you don't have to. Like, our job is to sell the book. Your job is to write them. If you don't want to do this nonsense, don't. All right. Just focus on the most important thing, which is writing the best book you can. We'll sell it, which is insane. I've said this before to other people on other podcasts too, where it's like that's the complete opposite of what's going on in America right now.
Yeah. No, in America, they're like, you better do a lot of work pushing this because we're not going to help that much.
No, I mean, like, case in point, like the devil himself, not to complain about it, but I was left with nothing. The publisher, I wasn't in a position to spend 5, 10, 15 grand on a publicist to manufacture recognition for it, which is what they do. It's like AstroTurf it's AstroTurf, but that's what you pay for. And I don't even know if that sells books, but you can get yourself in the New York Times and feel good about all that. So whatever. But publishers, there's a perfect publisher for maybe the devil himself that book didn't wind up at. And unfortunately they didn't do anything. Like, they couldn't get the book reviewed anywhere, didn't try. No interviews, no podcast invites. No booksellers were really interested in the book, even though I was doing everything I could. And the publisher had a publicity plan, but didn't do anything on it. So I was left basically, like, in the week it came out, with nothing. And I was just desperate to, like, get the word out. But you can only, get online and flap your arms up and down begging people to read the book. So
that's it.
It's like, it can be totally demoralizing, and writers have to steel themselves against that. You can be smart and work out how you're going to promote a book, for example. That's a whole other conversation, but it's one aspect of all this stuff that can make you crazy if you let it. And you really should just be focusing on writing stories that just blow people away,
Absolutely.
and aspiring to do that every time you sit down to write something.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, I mean, whenever I've written something that I really set out to, in particular with a lot of the poetry I wrote, but certainly with stories and novels as well, is that, like you mentioned earlier, you want a visceral reaction to it, but really, you almost on some level want to scar the reader. Like, you want to just leave them with something that they can't just forget it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I was trying to do that with the devil himself, even though it's probably my most cinematic and entertaining book. But I'm just not a fan of art in general that evokes a shrug. Like, I like stuff you either love or you hate. And I was talking in France about my new book, The Bonome, and the same thing. Like, I don't care if people hate this book. I really want it to be on the extremes as far as a reaction to it. What I don't want is that shoulder shrug. I don't want indifference. Like, it's okay. That is, like, to me, the most heartbreaking response to anything I may write. And it's going to happen regardless. But the stuff I seek out to consume, fiction, for example, poetry, everything, actually, outdoor writing, a film, a TV show, you name it. Like, I want, that's the reaction I want. I want to hate it or I want to love it. What I don't want is, like, empty calories. I don't want something kind of that I'm ambivalent about with no emotional response. So it's the absolute lodestar. It should be what you're striving to do. Whether, even if you're writing like a young adult novel, a romance novel, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, just write something with impact and power, because there's so much drivel out there.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, Peter, we're gonna end on that. Hang out with me for a couple minutes, and everybody who's watched this interview with Peter Farris, thanks so much for checking in. This is Starlite Pulpcast, episode 16. Again, The Devil Himself is the most recent U.S. version available for Peter. He's also got the new book. Pronounce it for me.
Well, it's the bone omen, and they call it le presage in France. So.
Le Presage in France as well. So anybody, obviously, you can get a copy of that as well. If you are
Speak French.
you can read French. So Peter, thanks so much for being on. We appreciate it. And everybody else, I will see you guys in a couple weeks.
In this topsy turvy